Welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery. It's TJ, your host. The last video we covered within the roots of the problem from Without Conscience, Robert D. Hare, PhD's book, The Disturbing World of the Psychopaths Among Us, the nature and nurture aspect of what makes a psychopath. We covered nature. Well, now we will continue on with nurture. Dr. Hare tells us that his favorite comic strip is called Calvin and Hobbes, and he discusses one particular sequence where an irritated Calvin yells,
"Why do I have to go to bed now? I never get to do what I want. If I grow up to be some sort of psychopath because of this, you'll be sorry!"
Nobody ever became a psychopath because he or she had to go to bed at a reasonable hour.
His father replies,
"Yeah,
retorts Calvin,
but you won't let me chew tobacco either. You never know what might push me over the edge."
Calvin's reflecting what's perhaps the most popular generalization about psychopathy, that it's all the result of early psychological trauma or adverse experiences, such as poverty, emotional, physical deprivation or abuse, rejection from parents, inconsistent discipline, and so on. Unfortunately, the picture that emerges from clinical experience and research is far from clear on this matter. He also states that he can find no convincing evidence that psychopathy is the direct result of early social or environmental factors, and he says that this opinion, he realizes, will be unacceptable to people who believe that virtually all adult antisocial behavior, from petty theft to mass murder, stems from early childhood maltreatment or deprivation. Neglect and abuse of kids can cause horrendous psychological damage. Children damaged in this way many times have lower IQs and an increased risk to have depression, to commit suicide, to act out, or to involve themselves in drug problems. And they're more likely than others to be violent and to be arrested when they're still juveniles. Among preschool kids, the abused and neglected are more likely than others to get angry, to refuse to follow the directions, and they're very likely to show a lack of enthusiasm. By the time they actually enter school, they tend to be hyperactive or easily distracted. They don't have self-control, and they're not very well liked by the peers. These factors do not make anyone into a psychopath. Dr. Hare tells us as well that there's little doubt that correction of these early problems ultimately would lead to a dramatic reduction in crime and other forms of social dysfunction. But it's unlikely that there would be a comparable reduction in the number of psychopaths and in the severity of their antisocial behavior. Adorable, terrifying Tess. In a made-for-TV film, Psychological, Ken Majid is shown working with his 6.5-year-old girl, Tess. She's just an angel if you look at her. She's got wide, sweet blue eyes and a gap where her front baby teeth have fallen out. Most of the film consists of videotapes of therapy sessions with Tess. Hearing her speak of the pain she inflicts on her younger brother Benjamin in the night, to the point where her parents feel they must lock her up in her room so that the embattled baby can sleep unharmed, is not only chilling, but it conflicts sorely with our understanding of childhood behavior.
Tess's abuse of Benjamin made life miserable.
Her adoptive dad told the interviewer,
"We thought at first Benjamin might have an abdominal problem, but turns out that Tess was punching him in the stomach at night. He had to tie her door shut."
Tess stole knives. Big, sharp knives, she admitted. "What did you want to do with them, Tess?" Majid asked his tiny patient. Calmly, the girl answered,
"Kill Mommy and Benjamin."
At one point, the film's narrator recounted how, in one of the many episodes of horrifying violent rage, Tess banged Benjamin's head repeatedly against a cement floor. Mother had to pry Tess's hands away from the poor baby's head.
"I didn't stop.
Tess reported.
I just kept on hurting him.
Thinking? The therapist asked.
Thinking of killing him."
At another point in the video, Majid asked Tess to tell him how she treats tiny animals.
"Stick him with pins a lot.
The girl says.
Kill him."
Tess and her brother Benjamin had been adopted by a loving couple who were appalled and frightened by Tess's behavior. In attempting to understand, they researched the case of Tess and learned that as babies in their biological family, both children, but particularly Tess, had suffered unimaginable sexual abuse and psychological as well as physical neglect. Majid presented Tess as a vivid, indeed an unforgettable example of what can happen to children who fail to attach or to bond to their parents or their primary caregivers during early life. He's got a book, High Risk, that was published in the year 1987, it outlined the position that the failure of the psychological parent-child bond to form at the proper developmental stage from birth to age 2 is a major factor in the development of psychological and behavioral problems, including psychopathy. Attachment theories continue to be popular in a large part because they appear to explain everything from anxiety to depression to MPD, multiple personality or dissociative personality disorder, schizophrenia, eating disorders, crime, and alcoholism. But most of the empirical support for these theories comes from retrospective reports of early experiences. Certainly not the most reliable source of scientific data. Moreover, there's little evidence that early attachment difficulties have anything to do with the development of psychopathy. Most of the external factors that are associated with the failure to bond, which include deprivation, rejection, neglect, abuse, and so on, can indeed produce terrible effects. And some of these effects may resemble a few of the traits and behaviors that define the disorder called psychopathy. Certainly little Tess in the television film seems a poignant example, but he says there's no evidence to suggest that failure to bond can result in anywhere near the full gamut of symptoms compromised by psychopathy, including the characteristic manipulative charm and the distinct lack of serious and debilitating psychological symptoms found in those who have been emotionally damaged by their social and physical environments. While some people do assert that psychopathy is the result of attachment difficulties in intimacy, Dr. Hare turns this argument around. In some kids, the very failure to bond is a symptom of psychopathy. It's likely that these children lack the capacity to bond readily and that their lack of attachment is largely a result, but not the cause, of psychopathy. This possibility is conveniently overlooked by those who assert that a poor environment or improper parenting is everything. The parents of a young psychopath who's turned their lives upside down in spite of their frantic attempts to understand and nurture this kid will find it doubly difficult to bear when society unfairly blames them, the parents, for the problem. Their psychological guilt trip to find out where they went wrong is not very likely to be fruitful. As far as my own views on this subject, nature or nurture, my first question would be, who says it has to be one or the other? As far as the nature part, that's questionable. If you have a family with 3 kids, let's say, and 2 of them turn out to be okay, but then one of them's the killer, but that doesn't necessarily mean nature's at fault. It could be some problem with the siblings. Maybe the other 2 get more attention, so the third one finds alternate ways to deal with reality, which involves psychopathic behaviors. And as far as the reproductive strategy he mentioned, I can see that, but I don't really see the relation to psychopathy as far as like a man wanting to spread his genes everywhere, because there are impractical consequences for doing that, such as child support and having a bunch of kids around that it doesn't care about. And I've seen these cluster bee creatures that love to spread their seeds everywhere they can. I haven't known any, though, that have fathered multiple children and then disappeared. I can also understand the story he told about the rock person. It's a classic story of somebody coming up to somebody else saying, "Oh, I can make you famous. Oh, I know all these people." But again, that can just be a con artist. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a cluster bee or a creature, psychopath. He does state that the sociobiologists don't argue that the behavior of these people in the bedroom is consciously directed towards passing on their gene pool. But nature has provided us with various strategies for doing so, but again, that's kind of strange. As far as nurture goes, in my experience with the creatures I've met, it seems that every single one of them has mentioned some kind of abuse, whether it be from their parent or their siblings, or it could be a neighbor in some cases, in which abuse occurs. But then at the same time, you have to realize what you're dealing with if it's a cluster bee creature. For example, I've heard one use abuse as an excuse for the irrational, inappropriate behavior that it would engage in, because I would try to sit them down and say, "Wait a second, we've already agreed that we believe that things should be this way, and you did this? How?" And the response, "Well, I was abused," and I think you still made a conscious decision to do whatever you did, and to say it's something you wouldn't do. So try again, but I do think nurture does have a lot to do with it, as opposed to the nature part, as if it, again, has to be one or the other, which it doesn't. And it seems Dr. Hare is against the idea that terrible childhood experiences are the cause. But again, I don't know that any of us can actually come up with the cause for anything. But I do agree that if the children are neglected or they're treated as they're not important, they're going to develop in poor ways, usually. Some may prosper and be strong and learn elsewhere, but when the kids are neglected, it makes them feel like they're not worth anything. And I've seen several where that's the case, where that's how the kids turned out as far as not following directions, not being as smart as they could, trying, for example, to play a game as far as making a claim about something when I would actually know more about the whole situation, and I could see that the person was clearly trying to achieve some kind of covert goal, which I've learned, as I've stated in many videos, not to try to challenge them on it because you'll just get thrown down some ridiculous labyrinth. You'll know that what you're stating is right, but these types of personalities will tell you that you're wrong even if you show them the proof right in front of their face. They'll have some excuse. Now, if it's somebody else, they'll be coming to the same conclusion you are. But because it's themselves, it's a different story. And as far as the adorable, terrifying Tess, I never saw this made-for-television film, but I did look up Ken Majid, and I guess it's Ken Magid, is the way I heard. And I did see a story about a little girl named Beth and a little boy named Jonathan. And it sounded very similar to the adorable, terrifying Tess section in this book. It showed the little girl talking and about how she wanted to stick pins and needles in her brother and kill him. And I don't even know if that was real, but I'm sure there are kids out there who do such things. And usually it's true, people do look at the parents. Now, if there are two other kids and they're fine but one isn't, that's strange. But as far as the parents, usually they're to blame. Like many years ago, I used to watch the daytime talk shows where they'd have these devil children on there, like this one little girl, and she'd say,
I'm 12 years old and I want to have a baby.
I think it was Sally Jesse Raphael with the red glasses. She was saying,
What about that baby's welfare? How are you going to pay for its food? Who's going to...
and the kid would just say,
Whatever, whatever.
and I'd think that's sickening. And then years later, I'd end up being involved with some of these cluster-B creatures, and I would notice something they were doing that was unproductive, and I'd say, hey, you don't want to do that because blah, 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 and I'd hear, whatever, and I'd think, you sound just like that kid on Sally Jesse Raphael who said whatever to everything. What was interesting about the Tess story, or the Beth story, the parents that took these two children on adopted them from some other family. And apparently the other family did commit abuse on the two children, which leans towards the nurture part as far as a major reason why the one came out the way it did. And there was talk about inappropriate child abuse below the belt from what I heard in the video. At the end of the section, he does mention that lots of people do assert that psychopathy is the result of these attachment difficulties, and the failure to bond is a symptom of the psychopathy. But he states that their lack of attachment is the result, not the cause of psychopathy. But regardless, I would think that for any child growing up, it would be necessary to have a healthy environment just to lower the chances that it will turn out to be some kind of monster creature. In the next video, we'll be covering an interactive model, which involves nature and nurture. So stay tuned.
Never fear, the narcopath is here.
I thought about changing my name. Maybe I'll be Susie. That's more like me. Ain't it? Whatever date I pursue, I'm gonna get. May not last forever, but at least I'm gonna get it. And I'll see to it. You might be next.
I tell you what, baby.
If you want all your dreams to come true, you should hang out with me. I'll make your dreams come true. All you do is name what you want, and I'll get it for you. In the beginning, it'll seem just like fun, because you'll probably ask what you owe me in return. For example, when I stole that $25,000 watch for you from Tiffany's. I'm really good. And I told you, oh, don't worry about it, it's nothing. Well, honey, let me tell you something about the narcopath. When we tell you it's nothing and you don't owe us anything, that's a smokescreen. The more value of what we give you, the more we believe secretly that you owe us. So don't be fooled by us telling you,
You don't owe a thing, just your friendship.
because it's a lie. But it gets you reeled in. By the time you figure it out, I've stolen so many things for you and made so many dreams of yours come true. You feel that guilt stuff that I have no idea about, but I know just what to say to trigger it. I'll bring up,
What about that watch? What about those earrings? What about that party I got us into because I showed my teeth? What kind of friend are you? You're just gonna dump me after one little lie you think you heard about?
And that usually works, but not always. So I've always got a healthy backup supply just in case one group doesn't work out. It's tough being an psychopath.
What, you came? You saw? He died. We came? You saw? He died. What, you came? You saw? He died. What, you came? You saw? He died. It's not a laughing matter. I take it really seriously.